Hey everyone, welcome in. Today we have my favorite build that I've been running for Season 2 so far, the Vortex Necromancer. Now this build is Abattoir of Zir ready. It performs really well in Nightmare Dungeon 100s, even solo. It doesn't really even take a lot of damage or any damage at all. It's perfect for hardcore. And in the first sort of group meta that we might have emerging for Abattoir of Zir, I think this might be the first zDPS build of the game. Now, what's really incredible about this build is that you have 4 different mechanics, or up to 3 or 4 different mechanics, where you can pixel pull enemies together and you can pull them across the screen. It's very, very good for a group meta, and it even helps you out with a sort of X-Falls centric damage that you've been seeing maybe from some other builds. You've probably heard this called like Pentadot or like Shadow X-Falls or whatever people are calling it. My version of this build is actually quite different in that we're prioritizing damage over time instead of necessarily trying to go for maximum crits, although we do crit too. We're getting all of the good things in this build, so let's get into it. Now, if you're following along and you want to build this yourself, I do have a link to the planner in the description below, so make sure you check that out. I also have all of my builds in my Discord. There's a builds channel where I keep all of those and links to all of the builds across all of the seasons, so you can always go back and check them all out. Now let's get into the items. First of all, I have Shaco. Now you might not have Shaco, so I have an option for you. This is where that extra pull is from. It's called the Godslayer Crown. Now, whether you have Shaco or you have Godslayer Crown, both are good options. I think the Shaco is a little bit better because of the DR, the damage reduction that you're getting. Now, one of the things this build is going to do is stack the maximum amount of damage reduction possible. We're going for survivability here, not necessarily maximum damage output. And the reason that we're going for that is twofold. First of all, we already do pretty good damage, but second of all, this build is built primarily either for hardcore players or for a group meta. And when you're in a group meta and your primary role in that group meta is to group enemies together, you're not really supposed to be the damage dealer. Your goal is to make sure that other people in your party can smash all of the enemies together. So you want to really focus on that pixel pull role, which means that in some cases, when you're in a group, you may even favor Godslayer Crown, although I think Shaco is of course just going to be fantastic because of the extra life, the cooldown, and the DR roll. Now, very critical to this build is the chest piece, and putting Void on chest piece. So Void is a utility aspect, which means that it can actually go only on it goes on different slots than defensive aspects. So this actually isn't swappable with your leg slot. So make sure that you put Void on your chest slot, and then we're going here for 1 armor roll and 3 DR rolls. Now the specific DR rolls don't necessarily matter. It's really hard to get 3 DR rolls on any gear, but I'll tell you the really good ones for this build are Close and Shadow damage over time affected enemies, and Fortify, typically in that order. You're gonna mostly be attacking enemies from a close distance with this build. For the gloves, we're going Howl from Below. Now there are variants, and I'm going to show you variants that actually don't use Howl from Below. You can see over here in my inventory, I have a whole bunch of swap items. And there are ways that you can actually get to a boss and swap to a, you can have like a boss glove swap or something like that. But Howl from Below is actually doing quite a lot for us. And I'm going to talk a lot about what Howl from Below is doing because of the context of the fact that we're using a Black River. So we're gonna come back to talking about Howl from Below, but just know that Howl is doing a bunch for us. Mainly, the lucky hit chance is super important. You wanna make sure that's super high. The fear chance is super important. The corpse skill attack speed and the multiplier itself is actually super helpful for our damage. But that fear is gonna be really important, especially for that group build. All right, then we're going Shielding Storm on Pants. Here, Pant, the modifiers or the affixes, very similar to chest in that we want to go total armor, DR, DR, DR. Now, if you are playing more solo, then you can swap one of those DR rolls, particularly if you have a bad one, for corpse ranks. So you can get up to 4 corpse ranks here for just a little bit more damage output. But for hardcore players, I would recommend just trading away those 4 ranks, unfortunately, for a little bit more DR. DR is very, very, very strong. All right, let's go to the legs. Flicker Step is critically important for this build. Not only are we going to get movement speed, not only are we going to get damage reduction, which you normally can't get on boots, but we're actually going to get a ability to have 100% uptime on Bone Storm. Now, Bone Storm itself is giving us some DR, it is giving us some crit, but most importantly, it's activating Shielding Storm, and it's going to keep 100% uptime on Shielding Storm, which means we'll always have barrier, which means that enemies will just try to chew through our barrier, and really the only thing that's going to get through our barrier is like a hit from Lightning Storm, or like some of the largest hits that you can get hit through on Nightmare Dungeon 100. And potentially Abattoir of Zir might be able to hit through your shield. And what's great about this build as well, you have Blood Mist. You're effectively an Infinimist variant. So if you're worried about the shield not protecting you enough, which you should basically never see your health go down in this build, well, you can just be invulnerable if you want. So this build is so tanky. It's insane. All right, let's go to the amulet. The amulet, we're gonna go movement speed. It's very, very important to go movement speed on Necromancer for amulet. It's basically a required stat for the class because we don't have teleport, we don't have leap, we don't have any buffs that make us move faster. We just have movement speed on amulet. That's basically all we get, and boots, of course. Then you're going to go 2 DR rolls. I think it's also, if you want to go for an armor max and optimize slightly differently than I have in this particular setup, then I think that's okay too. But I like 2 DR rolls here. And Gloom is probably the best choice. You can also go for corpse ranks, and sometimes you can go for terror as well. So those 3 I would look at, but Gloom is by far the best. And then, of course, on Blight, we're putting the Blighted aspect. For some reason, I have it 100%, 170 here. I think it's just because I've been swapping builds so much. You can see I have several 180s here on other stuff. So I'll get that to 180 before Abattoir of Zir comes out. All right, so Ring. Let's go Ring a Sacrilegious Soul. This one, again, we're going to talk about the actual effect here when we get to Black River. This is very important for the build. But you want to get that max lucky hit chance as high as possible. Life is insane on this build, and then of course you get ranks to corpse skills. Like, this Ring is so good for this build, it's wild. It's actually quite mid for other builds. For example, it does have a place on Bone Spear, but it's really just there for utility and the lucky hit chance. You're not really concerned with the corpse skills and the maximum life, although max essence is still quite good. So this Ring, it's the juice. Of course, we're gonna be running X-Falls. Now, in this particular setup, yes, X-Falls is doing millions of damage. Yes, it is doing quite a lot of damage, but it's more of an extra source of damage rather than being your primary source of damage. Your primary source of damage is going to be the damage over time coming from your corpse explosion. Finally, the shield. Now, you can run Lidless, but Lidless is less DR, and mostly this is a swap for when you're not running Abattoir of Zir or Nightmare Dungeon 100, right? So it's just a standard shield, like a 925 shield that has 3 DR rolls and has either a cooldown reduction roll or an all-res roll. Interestingly, shields can roll all-res, and quite a lot of it too. They can roll, I believe it's 15 is the max off the top of my head. I'll have to look at the planner, just double check. But you can run Disobedience here if you do not have if you don't like inherently have 13.5k armor, then you can roll Disobedience, and this will put you well above the maximum amount of armor that you need. So if you don't have 13.5k, run Disobedience. If you have 13.5k or higher armor, then what you can do is you can actually put Shared Misery here. And Shared Misery is going to be important for all of these CC effects that we're going to talk about right now as we talk about Black River. Because Black River is something that I think most of the Necromancer community has looked at and gone, actually, just run a wand with Ultimate Shadow. And certainly in Season 1, that was the case and that was the meta. And so I think Black River is rather poorly understood and it's misunderstood. And even as Season 2 started, I thought Black River was quite bad, and it took me a while to really kind of change my mind about this. So They actually changed Black River from Season 1 to Season 2, and the biggest change is that this gives you +3 ranks to Hewed Flesh. Effectively, it doubles the lucky hit chance that you're going to get a corpse from Hewed Flesh. And you go, okay, Echo, listen. You're consuming up to 5 corpses at once with Black River. You're effectively just demolishing your lucky hit chance, because when you consume 5 corpses at once, you're only making 1 blighted corpse explosion, and therefore instead of 5, and 1 is 5 times worse than 5. So your lucky hit chance is effectively, and your Hewed Flesh chance is effectively going into the ground, right? Well, I actually don't think so. And let's talk about this. So there's actually 2 ways to play Corpse Explosion builds. The first way you can play a Corpse Explosion build is you can sort of passively play Corpse Explosion with Sacrilegious. This means you're not manually casting Corpse Explosion a lot, and you're just building up corpses on the ground until you really need to explode them, and then you might explode them all at once. And so you have sort of like this bundle mentality where you explode a whole bunch of corpses, you do some other stuff, you explode a whole bunch of corpses. But if you're a really good player and you have high APM, then you might actually be able to outperform that. And the way you can outperform that is that you can basically always hold down the Corpse Explosion key, and you can do some of your other actions, like you can cast a Blight to pull enemies together with Void. You can cast Decrepify. You can get your Bone Storm up. You can spam Corpse Tendrils, but it's going to be on cooldown. And then in between all of those actions, you can be casting Corpse Explosion. So essentially, your mentality here changes when you have Black River. Instead of going, well, I'm going to have 5 times more corpses to explode, and therefore I'll always have corpses to explode. Instead, your mentality goes, well, you know what? My ability to generate a corpse is so high that I can actually explode the corpses just in time. So the thing that you want to do from a gameplay perspective here is you actually want to explode corpses as they spawn. And what you'll find is that not only are you exploding, 1 corpse when you do that, sometimes you'll have 2, 3, 4, 5 corpses spawn all at the same time. And your goal is actually to suck up all the corpses off of the ground as fast as possible, because A, you're getting more Hewed Flesh procs and you're doubling your Hewed Flesh range, but also you're getting that Corpse Explosion multiplier of 130x if you're getting per corpse. Right. So that can make your damage over time go really, really high, but it also means that you're proccing more from Hewed Flesh instead of just using a wand. So you're kind of double dipping when you're doing that. This actually gets better when mobs have more health and don't die, which is why I think this is actually a better Abattoir of Zir build, because what happens is you're going to be able to group all of the enemies together with Corpse Tendrils and with the Void, and then you're going to get all of those lucky hit procs for Hewed Flesh from each individual enemy, especially if they don't die. So if enemies have so much HP that they don't die, then you're just going to get tons and tons and tons of procs, and you're going to be able to hold down the Corpse Explosion key and get 5 corpses from every single cast from Black River. It's going to be wild, right? But it gets better, okay? So this is where we have to go into Howl and talk about Sacrilegious Soul, right? So your effective actions per minute is really limited by your attack speed. So how can we increase our attack speed? Well, the first way we can increase our attack speed is Howl from Below. It has 26.2% Corpse Skill attack speed. Now, Corpse Skill attack speed not only affects Corpse Explosion, but also Corpse Tendrils, which means we can cast Corpse Tendrils faster, because there's like an animation time for Corpse Tendrils. So that's less time that you're spending casting Corpse Tendrils, which you'll always want to do, and more time casting Corpse Explosion. And 26.2 is, by the way, as far as a roll goes, the maximum attack speed you can have on gloves is 15%. So Corpse Skill specifically at 26.2, that's a very good thing that only this unique has. But it gets better, right? So we have this lucky hit chance to fear. So let's talk about this lucky hit chance to fear, because because we're doing all these other things with the build, we got Black River, we got Sacrilegious Soul, we have all of these DR rolls taken on using a shield and using Shaco and all these sorts of things that we don't have really much room or any room for crit in the build. So how can we get crit? Well, it turns out that there's a vampiric power that will give us guaranteed crit as long as we fear. So getting fear into the build is quite good because it means we can guaranteed crit those enemies. And that's why I really like Shared Misery as well. So having fear in the build gives us back that crit that we would have otherwise lost. And an important point here is that when bosses are staggered, which this helps you stagger bosses too, when bosses are staggered, they're considered to have every single CC effect simultaneously for the purposes of multipliers and effects and so on, right? So when you stagger a boss, you are going to guarantee crit them every single time with all of your X-Falls procs, with all of your Shadow Blight procs and your Blight casts and so on and so forth, right? So that's really, really good. But finally, let's talk about Sacrilegious Soul. So Sacrilegious Soul, most importantly, is giving you an extra Corpse Tendrils that's getting auto-cast. Now that extra Corpse Tendrils is so good for pixel pulling enemies that it's just wild. It's wild to have an extra Corpse Tendrils because effectively you're bypassing the cooldown of your Corpse Tendrils, which mine in this case looks like it's 5.4 seconds, right? So I'm basically getting, if I look at my Sacrilegious, I'm getting 50% more Corpse Tendrils based on this one. Now I could get one that's slightly better. I'm looking for a better Sacrilegious Soul, but I can't go one at 8. But basically about 50% better, right? And then what's really cool about this is I'm also getting Corpse Explosion actions per minute, right? So effectively, not only do I automatically get Corpse Explosion cast for me, but what I'm doing with this build is I'm manually casting Corpse Explosion as much as I can. And the only way to cast Corpse Explosion faster is for, well, to get more Corpse Explosion cast speed or to have Corpse Explosion cast automatically for me. So effectively, Corpse Explosion getting cast by a different effect is giving me Corpse Explosion attack speed, which, by the way, this is quite a lot of Corpse Explosion attack speed, having it just cast automatically once per second, because you're also avoiding the animation, right? So in other words, this is going off while you're casting Blight. This is going off while you're casting Decrepify or while you're inside of Blood Mist, right? So effectively, this is like better than even attack speed, Corpse Explosion attack speed. That's why this is so good and why the build just absolutely slaps. All right, let's talk about the Book of the Dead real quick. I like to take Defenders here. It gives you 32 resistance. Now there are ways, especially if you get all res on shields, there are ways to max your resist out differently where you can then take the 15x shadow from Reapers. But if you don't have maxed all res, go for the Defenders first. And then if you can figure out how to sort of, if you get an all res on your shield and you have a really, one all res roll, and then 3 DR rolls on your shield, then you might be able to swap over to this one. All right, let's talk about Cold Skeletal Mages. We're gonna take that, sacrifice 15x to Vulnerable. We're gonna have Vulnerable all the time. You'll see that here in a second. And then of course we're getting 30x on the Crit Strike. This is just one of the best multipliers that we have in the entire class. So it's really, really hard to not take this. So basic skills, we're gonna take 2 points up here. We're not gonna use a basic skill, so it doesn't matter which ones you take. We're gonna take 3 out of 3 into Huge Flesh, and then we're gonna go Blight. Now there's 2 ways you can do Blight. The first way you can do Blight is you can go Immobilize. Now where Immobilize is gonna help you is it's going to keep enemies stacked on top of each other, and it's also gonna help you stagger bosses a little bit faster. Personally, I like to, if I was in a group meta, I would go Immobilize. If I'm going solo, then I'm probably gonna go for the 15x. So actually what's really cool about this isn't always the case in Diablo 4, but what's really cool is that both of these options are good for different reasons. I think the 15x is just better for damage, and the Immobilize is better for sort of group meta if you have somebody else in your party that's primarily doing the damage. You have a bonk barbarian, for example. Of course, we're going Blood Mist all the way up to Ghastly Blood Mist. We're going Max Corpse Explosion, 5 out of 5 Corpse Explosion to Blighted Corpse Explosion. We're taking Maximum Grim Harvest. Usually don't take Maximum Grim Harvest, so take note of that. This is going to make sure that we always have Essence Battery all the time because we're exploding corpses with Black River, so we're getting 30-ish Essence per 5 corpses that we're consuming all at once. So we're pretty much always going to have that max Essence, or we're going to be rocketing right back to it. Fueled by Death is, of course, fantastic. We're going to go Death's Embrace. I do put 2 points into Death's Reach. This is an option you have in the build, by the way. You can go 3 out of 3 Crippling Darkness if you want longer stuns, or you can pull 2 of those points out and you can put it into Death's Reach. Now, personally, I like to have Crippling Darkness just for the stagger on a boss, and it doesn't make difference if you have 3 points or 1 point for the purposes of boss stagger. The only difference this makes is the stun duration on sort of like regular mobs and elites and that sort of thing. Of course, we're going 3 out of 3 amplified damage for that extra damage multiplier. We're going to Aberrant Decrepify for the cooldown, and then we're going to Corpse Tendrils. Look at this. Look at this. Item contribution is 10. I have 11 ranks in Corpse Tendrils without even trying. We're going to go Vulnerable in Plagued Corpse Tendrils, which is just the GOAT. 3 out of 3 Reaper's Pursuit, Gloom, and Terror. And then, of course, we're going Bone Storm to Supreme Bone Storm, Standalone, Memento Mori, and we're taking Shadow Blight. So the skill tree, you've probably, if you've played Shadow builds before, you're probably very familiar with all of the little subtleties between here, and you've probably used literally every single one of these because these are just some of the best of the Necromancer's skills, period. All right, let's head over to the Paragon board. Now, just a reminder, I do have the planner, and the link is in the description below if you want to follow along. There are some changes to the Paragon that are going to have to be made for Tears of Blood, and we'll talk about that when we get to the Flesh Eater board. So that's a very important board to talk about. As for the starter board, this is a pretty basic starter setup. I would always recommend, regardless of the build, for Necromancer to always take a 150% bonus to all magic nodes within range glyph, just because you get damage here on all of these. You get damage, 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 and you get armor, armor, armor. So damage and armor, you really can't beat it. It's just so great. And then you get a 10x multiplier on top of that. So this glyph is almost always one of these glyphs, whether it's sacrificial or I believe the other one is territorial, where 150% bonus to magic nodes is just almost always on this board. We're going to take the Wither board next, and we're going to path through it this way. In terms of what we're avoiding the Shadow Resist because we're already maxed on that. And then here, I am int maximizing this. Sometimes you'll willpower maximize Wither because Wither is a good willpower board. But here I'm int maximizing this, and I'm putting Darkness here. So I'm getting 6.6% increased shadow damage per 5 int. And of course, we're taking Malediction. We're going down here for Gnawing Darkness. The third board you attach, and by the way, if you didn't know this, your attach order actually matters because the bonus that you get from the rare nodes, the requirement for that bonus will go up depending on your attach order. So you want to make sure you attach Wither second, you attach Scent of Death third here because these rare nodes are quite good, right? So we're going over here, we're grabbing Corrective, we're going here, make sure you grab the armor nodes here from Preservation. Roll up here. Now, this is where the build will get different if you have Tears of Blood or not. We're going in Imbiber if you don't have Tears of Blood here in this board. And then we're going down to Scent of Death, and we're picking up Ruin with healthy enemies and all of this crit strike damage, which is all getting X30'd by our Golem sacrifice, which is really great. Fourth board we're attaching is Flesh Eater. Now, this is probably the most important board for the whole build because this is where we're going to be putting our Tears of Blood glyph. It's also got a 40x multiplier. But what's interesting is that these nodes, you'll see these nodes, these rare nodes, I'm actually still able to hit those requirements, although just barely, right? So that fourth board is just barely able to hit all those rare requirements. So we're gonna go up here, grab Stifle, make sure you grab the 40x from Flesh Eater. It's so good, it's easy 40x. We're gonna grab Targeted. We're We're going to grab erudite, and we're going to int maximize this area. We're always going to int maximize this area no matter what we do. I'm putting exhumation here for now, and that's going to give me 207.9% corpse skill damage. That's where all that incredible, well, that's where a lot of that incredible damage over time from our corpse explosion is coming from. It's coming from this, and we're also getting fortify, and we're getting damage reduction. Exhumation, by the way, is a new glyph in Season 2, and it's so good. It's one of my favorite new glyphs. Well, it's one of my favorite glyphs in the class, just in total. I have trouble on builds where I don't take exhumation. For example, Bone Spear, I just always feel bad not taking exhumation because it's so good. All right, so before we get Tears of Blood, this is a pre-Tears of Blood. We're going to attach a 5th board. And we're going to go up here and we're going to take Territorial. Territorial is great because we're going to get 10% extra damage reduction against close, and we're going to get a little bit of extra damage from close targets. Overall, this extra board is actually not super important. Let's talk about why. When Tears of Blood, let's zoom in here. When we get Tears of Blood, and there's actually something we don't know here. So Tears of Blood says core skills, core stats. Every 5 core stats, it's going to increase your damage and damage reduction, right? So what does that mean? Well, every class has sort of a primary stat or a core stat, and for Necromancer, that's intelligence. So Dex doesn't count towards your damage, for example, right? So Tears of Blood might be optimized by just maximizing intelligence, and in that case, Flesh Eater is the best board. Now, if core stats in this case means that the way it works is that all stats add to that, well then we're going to need enough points to take all of these other stat nodes. And in that case, Flesh Eater is also the best board for doing that. So this board, regardless of what you do, is going to be the Tears of Blood board. And by the way, every class has the same board layouts. So other classes have the Flesh Eater board. It's different on, their legendary node is different, but they have the same layout. And so everyone is going to put Tears of Blood optimally into the same board, right? So this board will be really important for every single class. So if you do that, I believe it's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-ish, 10 or 11-ish extra nodes. And that means that you can't take this. So you don't take this, you don't exit the board, and you put those 10 points in here. So when you do that and you put Tears of Blood in here, Exhumation is also going to have to move. And when you do that, you take out Imbiber. Imbiber gets taken out, and you're going to take all of those extra points and you're going to int maximize this board. So right now this board is willpower maximized, and instead you're going to int maximize this board for Exhumation. And then if you have a couple of extra points here and there are some extra, kind of juicy nodes hanging out that we can find a little bit of optimization there. But overall, Tears of Blood is just going to be so good that you're probably not going to want to take that 5th board, and instead you're going to maximize this board. You're going to maximize this board instead. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for this one. I hope you really enjoyed this build, and I hope you have a lot of fun with it in Abattoir of Zir. I've been loving it the whole season. I'm going to be playing this probably the rest of the season, and of course, if you want to see this build live, I'm over at twitch.tv/echohack. I'll see you over there today. Have a good one. See you in the next one. Peace.